Too many students today mistake information accumulation for genuine learning. They consume books, articles, and lectures like hungry animals devouring food, but their souls remain malnourished. True intellectual work is not mere data collection, it is the sacred cultivation of the whole person through encounter with truth. When you study merely to pass examinations or advance careers, you reduce yourself to a machine processing information. But when you approach learning as contemplative discipline, something magnificent happens. Your mind grows in wisdom while your soul expands in virtue. The ancients understood what we have forgotten, that authentic study transforms not just what you know, but who you are. Today I will share with you the contemplative method that has formed great minds for centuries, showing how disciplined attention to truth simultaneously elevates intellect and purifies the heart. This is not another productivity technique, but a way of life that honors both reason and reverence. Chapter 1: The Sacred Foundation. Why Study Must Begin with Wonder. Before you open a single book, you must examine your fundamental disposition toward learning. Most students approach their studies with utilitarian calculation. What grades will this earn? What career advancement will this provide? What social recognition will this bring? Such motivations, while understandable, corrupt the very essence of intellectual work from its inception. True learning begins with what Aristotle called wonder, that profound astonishment at the mystery of existence that compels us to seek understanding. When you encounter a mathematical theorem, a historical event, or a philosophical argument, your first response should not be, "How can this serve me?" but rather, "What truth is being revealed here?" This shift in perspective transforms study from selfish acquisition into sacred participation in the cosmic order of knowledge. I have observed throughout my decades of teaching that students who approach learning with genuine wonder consistently achieve deeper understanding than those driven by mere ambition. Wonder opens the mind to receive truth on its own terms, rather than forcing truth to conform to our limited expectations. It cultivates intellectual humility, the recognition that we are seekers, not possessors, of wisdom. The practical implication is profound. Begin each study session with a moment of contemplative recognition. Acknowledge that you are about to participate in something larger than yourself, the great conversation of humanity with truth. Whether you are studying chemistry, history, or theology, you are entering into dialogue with minds that have grappled with reality's mysteries across centuries. This awareness transforms routine homework into sacred encounter. Furthermore, wonder generates the intellectual patience necessary for deep learning. When you truly marvel at the complexity of what you are studying, you naturally slow down. You savor insights rather than rushing toward predetermined conclusions. You allow understanding to emerge gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over a landscape, rather than demanding immediate illumination. This contemplative foundation also protects against the greatest enemy of authentic learning, the presumption that we already know what we need to know. Wonder keeps us perpetually open to surprise, correction, and growth. It maintains what beginners possess naturally but educated people often lose, the capacity to be genuinely taught. Chapter 2: The Architecture of Attention, Creating Sacred Space for Learning. Your external environment profoundly shapes your internal capacity for contemplative study. Just as a monk requires a cell designed for prayer, the serious student needs space specifically ordered toward intellectual work. This is not mere preference but spiritual necessity. Scattered environments produce scattered minds, while ordered spaces cultivate ordered thinking. Begin with silence. Not the empty silence of mere absence, but the pregnant silence of expectant attention. Modern students, addicted to constant stimulation, mistake this focused quiet for boredom. But silence is the natural habitat of contemplation. In silence, the mind stops chasing distractions and begins to settle into sustained attention. Great insights rarely emerge from noise, they arise in the stillness where deep thinking becomes possible. Your physical posture matters more than you might imagine. The soul expresses itself through the body, and intellectual work requires physical discipline. Slouching in bed with a textbook trains your mind for laziness, not precision. Sit upright, feet planted firmly on the ground, spine straight but not rigid. This posture of attention signals to your entire being that serious work is beginning. The Desert Fathers understood this. Contemplation requires bodily participation, not just mental effort. Remove every unnecessary object from your study space. Each visible item that is unrelated to your current task creates a small cognitive burden, a minor distraction that cumulatively fragments your attention. Your desk should contain only what serves your immediate intellectual purpose. This simplicity is not aesthetic preference but contemplative discipline. External order supports internal focus. Establish consistent timing for your most demanding intellectual work. The contemplative tradition has always recognized that certain hours are more conducive to deep thinking than others. For most people, the early morning offers the clearest mental state, before the day's concerns have cluttered the mind. But whatever time you choose, consistency is crucial. Regular practice trains your attention to engage deeply when the appointed hour arrives. Consider the quality of light in your study space. Harsh fluorescent lighting creates subtle stress that impedes contemplation, while natural light supports the soul's natural rhythms. If natural light is unavailable, choose warm, steady illumination that allows comfortable reading without strain. Most importantly, sanctify your study space through intention. Before beginning work, take a moment to acknowledge the sacred nature of what you are about to undertake. This need not be explicitly religious. Even secular students can recognize that sincere pursuit of truth participates in something transcendent. Such recognition transforms ordinary desks into altars of learning, ordinary books into vessels of wisdom. Chapter 3: The Rhythm of Deep Reading, Beyond Surface Consumption. Most students read as if they were racing against time, consuming texts at maximum speed to cover maximum material. This approach, while perhaps necessary for certain practical purposes, completely misses the contemplative dimension of authentic learning. True reading is not consumption but conversation, a patient dialogue between your mind and the author's understanding. Begin with what I call preparatory contemplation. Before opening any serious text, spend a few minutes considering what you already know about the subject. What questions do you bring to this reading? What assumptions might limit your understanding? This preliminary reflection prepares your mind to receive new insights by making conscious your current state of knowledge and ignorance. Read the first time for overall comprehension, resisting the temptation to take notes or make judgments. Let the author's argument unfold naturally without premature criticism or excessive analysis. Many students sabotage their understanding by beginning to argue with authors before they have truly heard what is being said. This first reading should be like listening to a piece of music. You absorb the whole before analyzing the parts. The second reading becomes active engagement. Now you question, critique, and connect. But this activity must be disciplined, not haphazard. Focus on understanding the author's logic before evaluating the author's conclusions. Ask yourself, what problem is the author trying to solve? What evidence supports the argument? Where might the reasoning be vulnerable? This methodical approach prevents the superficial dismissal that characterizes so much contemporary discourse. Take notes not to record everything, but to capture insights. The purpose of note-taking is not to create a summary that allows you to avoid rereading, but to crystallize your understanding and create connections between ideas. Write in your own words whenever possible. This forces genuine comprehension rather than mere repetition. Practice what I call contemplative pausing. When you encounter a particularly profound or challenging passage, stop reading. Close the book and spend several minutes considering what you have just encountered. How does this insight challenge your previous understanding? What implications might it have for other areas of knowledge? This pausing allows ideas to penetrate deeply rather than simply passing through your consciousness. Engage in imaginary dialogue with the author. After reading a chapter or section, spend time formulating questions you would ask if the author were present. What would you challenge? What would you request clarification about? What would you praise? This mental conversation deepens your engagement with the material and reveals gaps in your understanding. Finally, connect each reading to your larger intellectual project. How does this text contribute to your understanding of the subject as a whole? What relationships do you see with other texts you have read? Contemplative reading is never isolated. It always seeks to integrate new understanding into the growing edifice of knowledge. Chapter 4: The Art of Contemplative Note-Taking, Capturing Wisdom, Not Just Information. The difference between a scholar and a mere accumulator of facts lies largely in the quality of note-taking. Most students create notes that are elaborate transcriptions, faithful recordings that require no thinking and produce no insight. Contemplative note-taking, by contrast, is an act of intellectual creativity that transforms information into understanding. Begin each note-taking session with clear purpose. Are you seeking to understand a complex argument? To gather evidence for a particular question? To explore connections between different ideas? Without clear purpose, note-taking becomes mechanical copying that wastes time and obscures insight. Purpose provides the organizing principle that transforms scattered observations into coherent understanding. Record ideas, not just facts. When you encounter information, immediately ask yourself, what does this mean? Why does this matter? How does this relate to what I already know? Your notes should capture these reflections, not just the raw data. A date or statistic copied mindlessly teaches nothing. The same information connected to larger patterns becomes wisdom. Develop your own symbolic system for marking different types of insights. Use specific marks for questions that arise, connections to other materials, criticisms of arguments, and particularly striking insights. This visual coding allows rapid review and helps you identify patterns in your thinking. Over time, you will notice that certain types of insights recur. This awareness itself becomes a tool for deeper learning. Practice reformulation, expressing ideas in your own words rather than copying the author's language. This seemingly simple practice forces genuine comprehension. If you cannot explain an idea in your own words, you do not truly understand it. Reformulation also helps you integrate new concepts into your existing intellectual framework rather than leaving them as isolated fragments. Create conceptual maps that show relationships between ideas. Linear note-taking follows the author's sequence but may miss the logical connections that make arguments compelling. Visual mapping reveals the architecture of understanding, how premises support conclusions, how different arguments relate to each other, how insights from different sources can be synthesized. Include personal responses in your notes. Record not just what the author says, but how you react. What surprises you? What confirms your previous thinking? What challenges your assumptions? These personal responses are not mere opinion, they are data about how new learning is transforming your understanding. Tracking these responses helps you become conscious of your own intellectual development. Regular review is essential for contemplative note-taking. Set aside time weekly to read through recent notes, looking for patterns and connections that may not have been apparent during initial recording. Often the most valuable insights emerge not during first encounter with material, but during subsequent reflection on accumulated understanding. Most importantly, use your notes as starting points for further inquiry, not endpoints of learning. The best notes generate new questions rather than providing final answers. They point toward areas requiring deeper investigation and suggest connections worth exploring. Chapter 5: The Discipline of Intellectual Virtue, Character Formation Through Study. Authentic intellectual work is fundamentally moral work. It requires and develops virtues that transform not just your mind but your character. The student who pursues knowledge without cultivating intellectual virtue may accumulate information but will never achieve wisdom. Understanding this connection between learning and character is essential for contemplative study. Intellectual humility stands as the foundation of all other intellectual virtues. This is not the false humility that refuses to make any claims about truth, but the genuine recognition of the limits of your current understanding. Intellectual humility manifests in careful attention to evidence, willingness to change your mind when confronted with superior arguments, and acknowledgement when you do not know something. Students lacking this virtue become dogmatic, defensive, and ultimately closed to genuine learning. Cultivate intellectual courage, the willingness to pursue truth even when it challenges your comfort or convenience. Many students unconsciously limit their inquiry to conclusions they find agreeable or socially acceptable. But authentic learning requires following evidence wherever it leads, even into uncomfortable territory. This courage distinguishes the genuine seeker from the ideological advocate who uses scholarship merely to confirm predetermined beliefs. Practice intellectual honesty in all your academic work. This extends far beyond avoiding plagiarism to include fair representation of opposing viewpoints, acknowledgement of weaknesses in your own arguments, and recognition of the complexity of most significant questions. Intellectual dishonesty corrupts the very foundation of learning by subordinating truth to personal advantage. Develop intellectual patience, the capacity for sustained engagement with difficult material without demanding immediate resolution. Modern culture trains us to expect quick answers and easy solutions, but the most important questions require extended contemplation. Learn to sit with uncertainty, to work through complexity gradually, and to value the process of inquiry as much as its conclusions. Intellectual temperance involves disciplined attention to what truly matters. In an age of information overload, the temperate student learns to focus deeply on a few important sources rather than skimming superficially across many. This virtue also governs the use of time, ensuring that intellectual work receives the sustained attention it requires rather than being squeezed between entertainment and distraction. Justice in intellectual work means giving proper credit to sources, representing others' ideas fairly, and contributing constructively to the scholarly conversation rather than merely consuming others' insights. The just student recognizes that intellectual work is fundamentally communal. We build on the foundations laid by previous generations and have obligations to those who will follow. These virtues develop through practice, not through good intentions alone. Each time you choose careful analysis over hasty judgment, each time you acknowledge ignorance rather than pretending knowledge, each time you persist through difficulty rather than seeking easier alternatives, you strengthen intellectual character. Over time, these choices become habits, and these habits shape your fundamental approach to learning in life. The cultivation of intellectual virtue requires regular self-examination. Periodically assess your growth in these areas. Are you becoming more humble about your limitations while more confident in your genuine insights? Are you developing greater tolerance for complexity and ambiguity? Is your intellectual work contributing to your overall character formation? Such reflection ensures that your studies serve not just professional advancement but genuine human development. Chapter 6: The Integration of Prayer and Study, Contemplative Learning. The artificial separation between intellectual work and spiritual practice represents one of modernity's most damaging misconceptions. For centuries, the greatest minds understood that prayer and study mutually illuminate each other. Contemplation of truth naturally leads to contemplation of truth itself, while spiritual discipline provides the foundation for authentic intellectual work. Begin your serious study sessions with brief prayer or contemplative preparation. This need not follow any particular religious formula, but should acknowledge your dependence on wisdom beyond your own limited understanding. Such preparation disposes your mind to receive truth humbly rather than to manipulate information pridefully. It recognizes that genuine insight is ultimately gift, not achievement. Approach difficult texts as opportunities for contemplative reading. When you encounter a passage that challenges your understanding or reveals profound truth, treat it as you would a spiritual text requiring meditation. Read slowly, with attention not just to conceptual content but to the deeper realities being disclosed. Allow yourself to be changed by what you are learning rather than simply using learning to confirm what you already believe. Practice intellectual lectio divina, the contemplative reading method developed by monastic tradition. First read for general understanding, then read again to identify the central message, then read a third time to discover personal applications. Finally, spend time in silent reflection on what you have received. This method transforms study from information gathering into wisdom cultivation. Recognize that certain questions lead naturally toward prayer. When your studies confront you with the mystery of existence, the problem of suffering, the nature of truth, or the meaning of human life, allow these encounters to draw you toward contemplation of ultimate reality. Do not compartmentalize such moments as irrelevant to academic work. They represent the points where learning becomes most profound. Cultivate the habit of gratitude for understanding received. Each genuine insight, each moment of clarity, each resolution of confusion is a gift worthy of thanksgiving. This gratitude prevents the intellectual pride that corrupts learning and maintains the sense of wonder necessary for continued growth. Moreover, gratitude naturally leads to desire to share understanding with others, transforming selfish accumulation into generous contribution. Use periods of intellectual difficulty as opportunities for spiritual growth. When you struggle with complex material, when understanding seems impossible, when you feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you are trying to learn, offer these difficulties as forms of prayer. The intellectual humility learned through such struggles often teaches more than easy success ever could. Integrate brief periods of contemplative silence into extended study sessions. Every hour or two, close your books and spend a few minutes in quiet reflection on what you have been learning. What insights are emerging? What questions are developing? How is this learning affecting your understanding of yourself and reality? These pauses prevent intellectual indigestion and allow understanding to settle deeply into consciousness. Most importantly, allow your studies to inform your prayer and your prayer to illuminate your studies. The God encountered in prayer is the same truth pursued in genuine intellectual work. The virtues developed through spiritual discipline, attention, humility, patience, love of truth, are precisely the virtues needed for excellent scholarship. Recognizing this unity transforms both prayer and study into unified pursuit of the one reality that calls to both mind and heart. Chapter 7: The Fruits of Contemplative Learning, Wisdom for Service. The ultimate test of authentic intellectual work lies not in personal achievement but in service to truth and humanity. Contemplative learning naturally produces fruits that extend far beyond individual advancement. It generates wisdom that seeks to heal the world's ignorance and contribute to the common good of human understanding. True intellectual formation creates what I call apostolic urgency, the compelling desire to share understanding with others. When you have genuinely encountered truth through disciplined study, you cannot remain satisfied with private possession of insight. Truth naturally seeks to communicate itself, to illuminate other minds, to contribute to the great conversation through which humanity gradually advances in wisdom. This apostolic dimension distinguishes authentic learning from mere intellectual narcissism. Contemplative study develops profound respect for the dignity of questions that cannot be easily answered. Rather than producing intellectual arrogance, genuine learning cultivates awareness of mystery. The more deeply you understand any subject, the more clearly you perceive the vast territories that remain unexplored. This humility before mystery paradoxically generates confidence, not the false confidence of the person who thinks they know everything, but the genuine confidence of one who knows how to learn. Authentic intellectual work produces integration rather than fragmentation. Instead of accumulating disconnected specializations, contemplative learning seeks the underlying unity that connects all genuine knowledge. The student formed through this method develops capacity for synthetic thinking, the ability to perceive relationships between apparently disparate fields and to contribute to conversations that transcend narrow academic boundaries. The contemplative approach to learning naturally generates concern for wisdom, not just information. Information tells us facts, wisdom shows us significance. Information can be Googled, wisdom must be cultivated through patient contemplation and virtuous practice. The world suffers not from lack of information but from lack of wisdom, the capacity to use knowledge well, to perceive what truly matters, to distinguish authentic goods from mere preferences. Such learning also produces intellectual independence combined with proper deference to authority. The contemplatively formed student learns to think for themselves while recognizing their debt to the tradition of inquiry that makes thinking possible. They develop capacity for original insight while maintaining humility before the accumulated wisdom of humanity. This balance prevents both slavish conformity and adolescent rebellion. Most importantly, contemplative learning serves the formation of judgment, the intellectual virtue that allows practical wisdom in concrete circumstances. Pure information processing cannot teach you how to live well, how to make good decisions, or how to contribute meaningfully to human flourishing. Only learning that engages the whole person, that integrates understanding with character formation, produces the judgment necessary for authentic human excellence. The student formed through contemplative learning becomes what I call a contemplative in action, someone whose inner life of reflection naturally expresses itself in wise service to the world. Their scholarship is not escape from responsibility but preparation for more effective contribution. Their solitude is not selfishness but the source of genuine gift to community. Finally, contemplative learning produces individuals capable of lifelong growth. Because it is rooted in wonder rather than utility, in love of truth rather than desire for advantage, such learning continues throughout life regardless of formal educational requirements. The contemplatively formed person never stops being a student because they never stop being amazed by the inexhaustible richness of reality. Conclusion. The path I have outlined requires patience, discipline, and faith in the value of deep learning over quick results. In a culture obsessed with efficiency and immediate gratification, choosing contemplative study is countercultural, but it is precisely this countercultural stance that makes such learning so desperately needed. The world has plenty of information processors, it lacks contemplative thinkers capable of wisdom. Remember that intellectual formation is spiritual formation. Every moment of genuine attention to truth, every choice of depth over superficiality, every act of intellectual virtue contributes not only to your understanding but to your character. You are not merely filling your mind with content but cultivating capacities that will serve truth throughout your life. Begin today, even if imperfectly. Choose one study session to approach contemplatively. Create one period of silent reflection on what you are learning. Practice one intellectual virtue with intentional consistency. Small beginnings, pursued faithfully, become transformative habits that eventually reshape your entire approach to learning and living. The intellectual life is vocation, not mere profession, a calling to serve truth in service of humanity. May your studies become prayer, your learning become wisdom, and your knowledge become gift to the world that so desperately needs contemplative thinkers formed in truth and love.